Hello and a very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Pratik and I'll be taking up the News Today discussion for 16th April. So in the main news, the first news is on operational guidelines of Urban Challenge Fund launched by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. In this, we'll understand the importance of the Urban Challenge Fund and the philosophical ideas behind this and some of the important features behind this particular fund. The second news is about first wildlife offense prosecution through CBI. Here we'll understand the importance of the interagency coordination and some of the important offenses that have been flagged under this particular act. Then in the third news, we'll talk about the recent workers' protest and how they have highlighted some of the key concerns in the labor code reforms, particularly with reference to the 4 important labor code that have been recently enacted. Then we have certain quick updates, and in place in news, we have Red Sea, and in personality in news, we have Raja Ravi Verma. So let us start with the first news, that is the operational guidelines of Urban Challenge Fund launched by Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. Now, this topic is particularly relevant from the perspective of General Studies Paper 1, where we have social issues, and especially we need to study this under the topic of urbanization and the issues associated with urbanization. The second important area under which we need to study this is GS Paper 2 Polity, where we need to understand about the urban governance and also about the importance of local bodies, right? Especially in terms of the fund devolution and their performance. Now, this is a very important development because the Urban Challenge Fund is an important paradigm shift in the way the cities have been governed in India. So we all know that cities are the engines of growth, investment, and employment generation in the country, right? And also, they are very important for fulfilling our vision of a Viksit Bharat by 2047. So in light of this, several measures have been undertaken in the past. You may be aware about Swachh Bharat Mission, Smart Cities Mission, or Amrut. Now, most of these initiatives have targeted a specific areas and they have been focusing on the infrastructure development, whether it is through retrofitting or it is through redevelopment or through greenfield or brownfield development. But now, because of certain challenges, because of certain issues, and particularly because of the scaling issues, we need to have a different approach for urban governance. And this is where Urban Challenge Fund comes into picture. Now let us understand what has happened. What is the need for Urban Challenge Fund? So as we discussed, the country is rapidly urbanizing, and as per several reports, more than 50% of India's population is going to live in cities and towns by 2050. In fact, as of the recent census also, around 31% of India's population is living in the cities. And as for the informal reports, around 40% of the Indians already are living in certain urban areas or certain urban agglomeration. Secondly, there is a huge infrastructure gaps, particularly with respect to housing, roads, washrooms, sanitation, etc. So we require an investment of $850 billion. Now this investment cannot be generated by the public sector alone. It requires substantial investment from the market. And third, limited access to market finance. And this is because underdeveloped municipal bond market and low credit worthiness, right? So because of this reason, we require Urban Challenge Fund. Now let us understand what are the guiding principles of this. So once we understand the guiding principles of this, we will understand the operational details really well, right? So what are the operational or what are the guiding principles or the ideas or the paradigms with respect to the UCF? So first thing is, it is going to be market linked. So earlier, government would finance the entire projects, right? Or a substantial fund, and the rest of the funding would be procured through either market or through municipal bond or through state. Now, this particular fund is going to be largely financed through market, and it would require limited central support to ensure financial or fiscal discipline. The second important thing is it is going to be challenge-based selection. That is why the challenge comes into picture. So it is not going to be given on any arbitrary manner. The funding will be given from the government through certain parameters, through competitive process, focusing on impacts and the reforms that have been ushered by a particular city. Next, the disbursement will be based on reforms that, and it is essentially, it follows from the second point itself, that funds will be released only when governance, financial planning reforms are undertaken, right? So for second and third points are in a way interlinked. And lastly, there is going to be an outcome-based approach instead of input-based approach. So the funding is tied to the performance, milestones, and measurable results. Now, what are the important details about Urban Challenge Fund? See, first of all, it is going to be a centrally sponsored scheme, and the fund allocation within this scheme is 1 lakh crore. Within this 1 lakh crore, 90,000 crores will be given for the project planning and implementation. 5,000 crore will be for the capacity building, and the rest of the 5 crore will be for credit guarantee sub-scheme, right? So it is, the 1 lakh crore is divided into 3 components, right? Then the pattern of project completion will be 25% cost will be provided through the fund, the Urban Challenge Fund. Second, at least 50% must be mobilized from the market sources, or especially it has to be from the private participation. The remaining 25% can either be contributed by the states or the urban local bodies, or raised from the market. So this is going to be how the projects are going to be completed. It will not completely be funded by the central government. Only 25% will be used here. The 50% of the fund will be from market, and 25% from the states, UTs, or the urban local bodies. Next, the focus areas are essentially for creative development of cities, which include ensuring that the older areas or older parts of the cities are retrofitted and made suitable for tourism. Then it will be also a focus on water and sanitation issues, and also for ensuring that cities become a growth hub by ensuring that there is proper logistics, transportation, end-to-end transportation, last mile connectivity would also be promoted within this funding. Then what are the eligible cities? So as per the list provided by the government, the eligibility will be for all the cities with a population or 10 lakh or more. And this will be decided by the estimates by 2025 reports. Secondly, all states and UT capitals will not be covered under above, right? So this is an important statement because most of these cities already are covered under smart cities or Amrut. So this is going to focus largely on tier 2 and tier 3 cities, which have been expanding substantially but are not covered under the smart cities or Amrut. Thirdly, they have also mentioned that major industrial cities with a population of 1 lakh or more will also be counted within this particular funding. Implementation period is from 2025-26 to 2030-31, and there's also scope for extension. Next important project or important declaration is that projects that are already funded under Amrut 2.0 or Swachh Bharat Mission 2.0 or other CSS are not eligible under UCF. So within this, we have another scheme. So we discussed that the 1 lakh crore project or the funding that has been released is divided into 3 components. The 90,000 component is for project implementation, 5,000 is for project preparation or for capacity development, and the rest 5,000 is, or 5,000 crore is for CRGSS, that is Credit Repayment Guarantee Subscheme. Now, this is going to be very important for the development of the tier 2 or tier 3 cities. Why? Because most of the investors do not want to invest in certain areas like tier 2 or tier 3 cities, or especially in hilly areas or northeastern states, because the prospect of getting back their investment is often considered very bleak. So this is the government's way of telling the investor that we are providing you with some sort of guarantee that if you come here and you invest here, and if you're not able to recover your finances, we will be helping you out. And how the government will be helping out? through providing a credit guarantee of up to 7 crore or 70% of the loan amount, whichever is lower, for first time loans. Also, it enables the urban local bodies, especially from the smaller cities, to access market based financing through credit guarantee. So, it is going to be very instrumental in inclusive growth and for sustainable development. Now, from this topic, from the topic of urbanization, UPSC has asked a lot of questions, especially evaluation of schemes like Swachh Bharat Mission or smart city projects, right? And last year itself, UPSC asked about how does smart city in India address the issues of urban poverty and distributive justice, right? Now, a similar kind of question can also be asked in terms of how the Urban Challenge Fund is a break or is a transformation in terms of the urban governance in India. So what are the major pillars of the development or the thought process with respect to the Urban Challenge Fund, which has been a very radical or a very transformative in its approach, right? So we can talk about those components. So let us start with the next topic, that is about the first wildlife offense prosecuted through CBI. And this topic is part of GS paper 3 environment. Now here, what is the news all about? So recently, the Delhi court has convicted a person for illegal export of Shahtush shawls made from the hair of Tibetan antelope in violation of the Wildlife Protection Act, 1972. So let me give you a brief about this case. So back, like 17 years back, one of the officers of the WCCB, that is Wildlife Crime Control Bureau, she saw that a lot of the shawls that were being imported or that were being traded, they had hairs of Tibetan antelope. And during that time, the Tibetan antelope was a critically endangered species and was under CITES, right? Which means that there cannot be any sort of trade that would be done under the endangered species, right? So it was the trading of hair or any products from endangered species is governed through CITES. And under the CITES 1975 Act, it was banned, right? So this officer who was working in Wildlife Crime Control Bureau saw that under the Pashmina shawl, this hair of Tibetan antelope, which is also known as chiru, was being used. So what she did, she used some of the, she did not allow that particular trade to go through, and she flagged it. And then some of the samples were sent to the Wildlife Institute of India. Now, Wildlife Institute of India, essentially, its role is to ensure that the proper research and development is done, right? So it was essentially checking to what extent the claim made by the officer of the WCCB is correct. Now, WCCB or Wildlife Crime Control Bureau is an research, or it is essentially an intelligence agency, right? It has been created under Wildlife Protection Act 1972, right? So the act, so it is a statutory body. It has been created under this act in 2007. So the WPA 1972 was modified or amended in 2006 to create this body, and its role is to gather intelligence with respect to the trade or things which are conducted under the purview of or against the purview of Wildlife Protection Act. So this body is essentially for the intelligence role. And Wildlife Institute of India, its role is to research and do scientific investigation. And the CBI is a prosecuting wing, and it's also the investigation wing. So CBI, and lastly the Customs. Customs is under Ministry of Finance. So it was really essential for gathering the evidence and to ensure that the evidence is not tampered with, and it was properly provided to the courts whenever it was required. So what we can see here is a very wonderful collaboration by different agencies of the government. So CBI, as we all know, is functioning under Ministry of Personnel, Pensions and Public Grievances. Wildlife Crime Control Bureau is functioning under Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Customs is under Ministry of Finance, and Wildlife Institute of India, like WCCB, is under Ministry of Environment. So this is an example of interagency coordination, and how, because of the targeted approach and because of the coordinated response, they were able to manage the conviction that took around a span of around 17 years. Now, from the perspective of prelims, we need to understand some of the details with respect to these products, especially the Shahtoosh wood. Now, Shahtoosh is under fleece and can only be obtained by killing the Tibetan antelope, which is also known as chiru, right? So you all would be aware of Pashmina shawl. Now, to get Pashmina shawl, the goat from whose wool that Pashmina shawl is taken need not be killed, right? Because that goat sheds wool during the spring season, right? But here, the Tibetan antelope doesn't shed its wool because the place where it resides is almost very cold during that time, and it is especially around -40°, right? So it doesn't have any kind of spring season where it would shed its wool. So the only way to get the wool is by killing that Tibetan antelope. And generally, to make one particular shawl or any scarf, you require 3 or 4 Tibetan antelope to kill, right? That is why the population of Tibetan antelope, which used to be around 1 million back in 1950, was almost reduced to around 80,000, 90,000 by 2016 or 2013, right? 2000. Later, so that is why during that time it was declared as critically endangered, but later it became near threatened. Now, almost all the Shahtoosh is spun and woven illegally, largely in Jammu and Kashmir, and it is also it is taken from Tibet or from China. And the color ranging from the shades of brown, beige, and gray, depending on the gender and body area of chiru. So there's no specific color that it produces, and it has been banned. The Shahtoosh shawl trade has been banned globally, not just in India, but globally since 1975 under CITES, which is Convention on International Trade for the of the Endangered Species. Now, it is one of the convention in the world which is legally binding to all the signatories. Now, India is a signatory of this convention, which means that India is legally bound to follow this convention. Now, let's take about chiru, which is Tibetan antelope. So its scientific name is Panthalopus hodgsoni. Habitat. Its habitat, or the place where it lives, is where the average annual temperature is below freezing, like Tibetan Plateau, and in the Xinjiang and the Qinghai provinces of the western China, where the temperature is normally around -40°. The population of chiru in India, which is largely seen, are migratory in nature, and in India, we have attempted several times to breed chiru, but it has largely been unsuccessful. In terms of the conservation status, under the Wildlife Protection Act 1972, it has been given the status Schedule 1 and 4. And under CITES, it is under Appendix 1. And under IUCN Red List, it is given the status of near threatened. Earlier, it used to be critically endangered, but now it is near threatened. Next, what are the threats that it faces? Obviously, the first one is illegal poaching because of their wool. It is highly in demand, and especially for that shawl. And then it is important for loss of habitat is again a very important component of its threat that it faces, and harsh natural environment under which they live in. Then some other initiatives to curb the illegal animal trade. So the first one is CITES that we had already discussed, Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. That is a legally binding agreement regulating wildlife trade. So this part is very important, that it is a legally binding one. Second, Wildlife Crime Initiative, that is WCI. So WWF and Traffic has launched in 2014 to combat transnational organized wildlife crime. Third, we have Wild for Life campaign. So this is led by UNEP, that is United Nations Environment Program. This initiative uses social media to reduce consumer demand for illegal wildlife parts. And from India, the Wildlife Crime Control Bureau that we had already discussed, WCCB, has been established under the Wildlife Protection Act 1972 as amended in 2006 for the control of illegal trade in wildlife and its products. So again, remember that its function is not to investigate or to prosecute. It is just an intelligence wing, right? So that is why WCCB gave intelligence information to the CBI, which used it to prosecute. And then WII used the information to go for research, and customs used the products for the prosecution, right? So this is an excellent example of interagency coordination. Now let's look into the third news. The third news is about recent workers' protests, which have highlighted the key concerns in labor code reforms. Now, labor, this part or this topic is the core part of this is part of GS paper 3 economy, where we have topics like employment and labor, etc. So this is directly part of this, and in fact UPSC has in the past also asked question on the labor codes itself in a direct manner. But at the same time, this can also come as an example, or as it will also fall under the social issues topic as well, because there has been a lot of protest. So whenever protests happen, it is because there's a perceived sense of injustice. So we need to understand the social composition of the people who are protesting and what kind of grievances they have, right? So that would count as part of social issues as well. And the government response can either be understood in terms of policy, GS paper 2, or under economic policy making, that would be under GS paper 3. So recently, we have, or India has enacted 4 labor codes. Labor code, code on minimum wage, code on social security, code on occupational health, occupational safety, and lastly, code on industrial relations. So 4 codes have been finalized in 2025 itself, and it has consolidated as many as 29 central laws. And the purpose is to simplify labor and regulatory framework. Now the problem here is that the labor sector is a very complex one. The labor ecosystem is a very complex one, where the interest of stakeholders and shareholders are very much in diverse or in disharmony. And to reconcile them is a highly challenging task, right? So this is why it has become very difficult to reconcile the two challenges. So we need to understand what are the challenges that have come by integrating or the consolidation of the labor codes that we had tried in the recent past. So let us start with each of the important labor codes that we have recently passed. So if we start with the code on minimum wage. So what exactly it does? The code on minimum wage is to set minimum wages to all the worker. Now in India, we have this article 43, which talks about setting a living wage. So this is part of India's DPSP, Directive Principle of State Policy, one of the non-justiciable measures that have been suggested to the government, right? And this is to assure a living wage to all the workers. Now, in line with that statement or in that principle, India has enacted code on minimum wage, right? And this was supposed to give them a wage which is inducive, or which is going to give them some sort of dignity and harmony. Now, the problem is the wages have been suppressed for a very long time, and because of the changes in the prices caused by inflation, and also because of the regional disparity, there has been a huge problem in terms of what should be considered as a minimum floor price or national floor price. Now, this is also influenced by development in other parts of the country. For example, recently, Haryana government talked about or planned to hike the minimum wage of the people, of the workers in the state of Haryana. Now, this sparked a protest in the several parts of other states, such as in UP or even in Coimbatore in Tamil Nadu, because they were also anticipating similar kind of wage hikes, which was not done, and that led to protest. So, for example, in Noida or in other parts of the country. Next, the issue with respect to code on social security. Now, social security means that giving healthcare, pension, etc. Now, this is also part of Article 42 or 41. Article 41 talks about giving some sort of uh, ensuring that some dignity of work is given, and especially in old age and sickness, some sort of measures would be taken up by the center or by the government. Now, this expands social security not just to the informal workers, but also to the gig workers as well, gig workers or the platform workers as well. So it was hailed as one of the transformative development with respect to the labor reforms in the country. At the same time, it also faces several challenges. So first thing is that there is lack of universal coverage because of the thresholds, size thresholds for the coverage. For certain schemes, the threshold is higher, and for some other, the threshold is lower. So again, there's no uniformity. The second problem is some of the issues that are faced by the gig workers or the platform workers. So there is opaque algorithms which, based on ratings, pay without transparency, limiting workers' ability to challenge penalties or changes. So the algorithmic bias comes across as one of the challenges that the gig worker face. Then there is precarious earning, which means that the earnings do not account for the fuel cost, which can fluctuate depending on various reasons, including the geopolitical tussle as well, or loss of incentive for rejected order. So because of this, there is huge problem with respect to the social security thing there. Then, with respect to occupational safety, health, and working condition, again, this is largely from Article 42 of the Constitution, which talks about ensuring a safe place of operations, and for also ensuring that there is the maternity benefit is also taken care of. Now, Article 42 directly talks about this particular code, that is Occupational Safety, Health, and Working Conditions Code. So the good thing is that it improves workplace safety, health, and working condition. However, the problem here is on compliance burden, because the conditions for safety, health, etc. can be very cumbersome. It is largely absorbed by the very large firms, right? But for the lower firms or for the small and medium enterprises, this compliance cost can erode their profitability, right? So they face heavier compliance burden, and it offsets their gain. So again, this is one of the challenge of the labor reforms that have been recently undertaken. Then with respect to industrial relation. So industrial relation basically means how the worker and manager or management is going to negotiate pay, or what should be the protocol with respect to retrenchment or firing of workers, right? So under Article 43A, it is envisaged that workers will be inducted into management so as to give a fair chance of workers to give their grievances a proper channel. Now, here what has been done is that the unions, the labor unions, disputes, employment conditions are now regulated through the Code on Industrial Relations. And the problem here is that it applies largely to the larger firm. It excludes the smaller firms, which are called as dwarf firms. So it, in a way, incentivizes the firms to continue to stay low or small, because if they start becoming big, then they will have to come under the larger compliance burden. Especially earlier, 300 workers were needed uh, for prior government approval for layoff, but now this has been reduced to 100 workers, right? But the idea is, the core idea remains that even though this whole industrial code has been shifted, or the protection has been given a little bit more towards the employer side, and the protection under the industrial relations have now been slightly taken away from the workers. It doesn't take into account that there are fixed term employees and other employees which can be laid off without any sort of further notice or further protection. And lastly, the most important challenge which the labor code has been facing is that there is weak enforcement. Because of the weak enforcement, even if our policies or laws are very important or very well designed, but if its implementation is shoddy, or if its implementation is not done in a proper way, then it doesn't give any incentive for the employers to follow through all such noble vision. In fact, the informal sector, which comprise more than 90% of the workforce, the working condition of these enterprises are very difficult to monitor, especially because of their sheer size and also because of lack of awareness. Now, what can be done to address this? See, the first thing has to be, we need to have stricter enforcement. Now, how can we increase enforcement? Enforcement can be increased by leveraging a lot of traditional and non-traditional tools. So for traditional tool, it can be through word of mouth, through awareness generation, and using technology. So technology here can be a wonderful tool to ensure that there is investment in digital compliance, especially through digital wage payments, where we already have this initiative called e-Shram portal, e-records, etc. Then administrative capacity should also be enhanced. In fact, the governance measures, the corporate governance measures should also be undertaken at most of the firms, right? Then binding yet sustainable national floor wage should be given. Now, this is very important because the national floor wage labor is a concurrent subject, which means that both center and state can interfere in the labor related matters. So one, we should have a national floor wage, which means that no state can give any wage which is lower than the national wage. At the same time, it should be given, the chance should be given to all the state to fix their particular region based national floor price or floor wage, depending on the various variations or regional disparities. Along with that, there should be some inbuilt mechanism that would connect or that would add the inflation linked revisions without any formal change, right? It should be done at a periodic level without any major policy change. Then policy calibration should also be done through scientific national floor wage reflecting regional cost and productivity. Now, we have discussed that compliance costs have increased for the SMEs. So the small, medium enterprises should also be given certain subsidies, tax incentives, access to credit, and technology. Then we should operationalize provisions for gig and platform worker through social security fund. In fact, many of the states have also started to work on that. Plus, we should also be helping these workers in capacity building, in development of their skills, so that they also integrate some of the emerging technologies in their work culture. So from this, UPSC has asked a direct question, that is, discuss the merits and demerits of the 4 labor codes in the context of labor market reforms. What has been the progress so far in this regard? So this question came in 2024, and UPSC and government had not yet implemented the labor codes at that point of time. So at that point of time, even though the labor codes had not been implemented, they had already, the codification had been done way back, right? So here we have to talk about all the merits and demerits that we have just talked about. We can go for code by code analysis, like we can talk about code on minimum wages or code on occupational safety, etc. Or we can go for the holistic analysis of all the major labor code reforms. Let's now talk about the place in news, and in the place in news we have Red Sea. Now, why it was in news? Now, it was in news because of the recent development in the West Asian crisis, especially the Iran-US escalation. So as you all know, that the Islamabad peace talk that was going to happen has somewhat derailed, or in fact it has completely derailed because of the maximalist position adopted by US and Iran. Now, under one of the things, what President Trump has said, that it will also be blocking the second part of the Persian Gulf, or ensure that Persian Gulf will also come under the naval blockade of US, right? So as a response of that, what Iran has said, that it will block trade through Red Sea if the US naval blockade continues around its ports, right? So this is going to be a tit for tat response, and Iran through its Houthi rebels have done that in past after the October 7, 2023 attacks, right? So this is a very likely condition that it may happen, and if it happens, it may lead to further escalation of the crisis. So let's understand the Red Sea area. So Red Sea is considered a fjord type marginal sea. So fjord means that is deeply a long, deep, narrow body of water. As you can see here, it reaches far inland. And here, as we can see that it is connected to the Gulf of Aden. So this is Gulf of Aden and this is Red Sea. It is connected by Bab el Mandab Strait. Okay, so this strait Bab el Mandab is here. And then at this point you have Suez Canal. And this is Gulf of Aqaba. Okay, Gulf of Aqaba. Now, what are the major border states? So here you have Egypt, you have Sudan, you have Eritrea. So these are the western boundary nations. Then you have the eastern boundary nation where you have Yemen, you have Saudi Arabia, and you also have Israel. So Israel is also, so this is Israel. Sorry, this is Israel. So this is part of this Gulf of the bordering state of Red Sea as per the eastern part, right? So it has western and eastern coast, and it receives very little precipitation, and no water enters the Red Sea area from rivers, as you can see here. Now in personality in news, we have Raja Ravi Verma. And why he was in news? Because one of his paintings, the Yashoda Krishna painting, was sold for rupees 167 crore. And this depicts the role of rarity, cultural value, and market dynamics in the art evaluation. So we have understood like that the foreign arts are sold at very exorbitant prices, but even arts from Indian painters or Indian artists are also very valuable. So let us understand more about Raja Ravi Verma. So Raja Ravi Verma was born in 1848 and he died in 1906. He was born in Killimanur, which is in present Travancore, Kerala. He belonged to the family of Maharajas of Travancore in Kerala and was addressed as Raja. That is why his name is Raja. He is called as the father of modern Indian art. What was his key contribution? So he kind of blended both the Western tradition and the Indian tradition. From the Western tradition, he took the art of oil painting and realistic life study. And he painted themes. So his themes were Indians, but his style was Western. So this is how he blended both Western and Eastern components. So he painted themes from Indian mythologies depicting scenes from popular epics like Ramayana and Mahabharata. He also established printing press, the Ravi Verma Fine Art Lithographic Press and the FAL Press. Then his most famous work is Damayanti talking to a swan. Then Shakuntala looking for Dushyant, Nair lady adorning her hair, and Shantanu and Matsyagandha. So Shantanu and Matsyagandha, we all know it's from Mahabharata. And we also have Shakuntala looking for Dushyant. What kind of awards did he got? Kaisar-e-Hind Gold Medal 1904 by Lord Curzon on behalf of the British Empire. The citation formally used the title Raja for the first time. So in a way, Raja was given to him by the British Empire in 1904, but he already was called as Raja because he belonged to the royal family of Travancore. And we can learn certain value from Raja Ravi Verma, such as cultural nationalism, feeling pride in our culture, on our heritage, on our mythologies, and aesthetic excellence, taking the best from most of the world, right? So not shying away from learning from other nation, other culture, and humanitarianism, to see some of the softer sides of people, to understand that the emotional aspect or emotional journey of people is not merely confined to one region or one area, but also it transcends across humanity. Now, under quick updates, let us start the discussion. So first is about heat waves. So the IMD, that is the Indian Meteorological Department, or the MED, has forecast heat wave condition over multiple states like Chhattisgarh, like Madhya Pradesh, Karnataka, Telangana, etc. Right? So we just need to understand what exactly is a heat wave, when it is announced, and what exactly its impact on various life walks of life. So IMD declares a heat wave when the temperature of a place crosses 40 degrees Celsius in the plain. So depending on different geography, the heat wave definition will vary. For plains, it is 40 degrees C. For coast area, it is around 37 degree. And for the hills, it is 30 degrees C. Next, it also follows certain other criteria, such as based on departure from normal temperature. So based heat wave between 4.5 degrees Celsius to 6.4 degrees Celsius from the normal temperature, if it exceeds, then we will call this as a heat event or heat wave event. And if it exceeds 6.4 degrees Celsius, it would be considered as a severe heat wave event. Now, based on departure from actual maximum temperature that is applicable for plains only, heat wave is whenever the heat wave or the temperature is more than 45 degrees Celsius, irrespective of the deviation, it will be called as heat wave. And irrespective of the deviation from the normal, if the temperature increases to equal to or more than 47 degrees Celsius, it will be called as severe heat wave. Now we have understood what is heat wave. Now it is very important that we also understand that heat wave also takes a lot of toll on the human health in terms of severe problems in breathing. It leads to heat burn, right? And it can also cause various kind of health related issues. Moreover, it also has issues, or it also takes a toll on the agriculture. It prevents people from traveling, and thereby it also leads to reduction in industrial or output generation, economic productivity, right? Plus, it also has severely impacts the vulnerable section of society, especially those who are supposed to work in the outside. So for this, we need to have certain heat management plan, which has some of these plans have been suggested by the NDMA, that is National Disaster Management Authority, right? So we need to understand this in the way that what exactly is IMD definition of this. Then we need to understand its impact on human health and on various sectors of the economy. And finally, what could be the resolution that the NDMA has proposed to counter heat wave. Next topic is on NBC FDC. So NBC FDC essentially means National Backward Classes Finance and Development Corporation. So why it was in news? Because it has recorded its highest ever disbursement of money, which is around 613 crore in FY 2025-26. Now, we don't need to know the amount that is in news, but we need to understand the nature of the body that NBC FDC is. So the objective of NBC FDC is to promote economic and development activities. For whom? For the benefit of the backward classes, the so-called backward classes, and to assist the poorer section of these class, right? Poorer section of these class, in what way? In skill development and in self-employment ventures. Now, what is the nature of this organization? It is a Sector 8 company. Sector 8 company is a company that is registered under the Companies Act of 2013, and which means that it is a specialized, not for a non-profit organization to promote charity, science, education, etc. It comes under the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, and it provides financial assistance through state channeling agencies, SCAs, nominated by the state government, UTs, and banks. Next topic is about semaglutide. And why it was in news? Because recently Dr. Reddy's has received approval from India's drug regulator, and its name is CDSCO, that is Central Drug Standard Organization, to make and sell the generic versions of semaglutide tablets. So first understand what is branded drug and what is generic drug. So branded drug is one which is first of its kind to treat a particular disease or any ailment. And essentially, once a branded drug is given permission to sell its product, it is given for a certain time. And once this time is expired, then other companies can use the formula that the branded drug has made to sell the cheaper version of that drug. And these cheaper version of drug are called as generic drugs. Now, what is semaglutide? It belongs to the class of medications known as GLP-1 receptor. It has been in news for a very long time, so you should understand what exactly is the full form as well. That is glucagon-like peptide 1 receptor agonists. And what exactly it did, they mimic or they copy the natural GLP-1 hormone. So GLP-1 is a hormone that is found in body of human beings, which helps regulate blood sugar levels and appetite. So initially, this was considered as a treatment for diabetes, but as a side event, it also sought to reduce the weight as well of the patients. So now it has been sold as a sort of a drug for weight reduction. And now in India, this is available under Dr. Reddy's. But again, make sure that you read about the side effects as well. So what are the treatment? It is for treatment of type 2 diabetes, weight loss, kidney and cardiovascular diseases. It can be injected or taken as a tablet, and the brand name that semaglutide is known for is Ozempic. You may have heard about this: Ozempic, Wegovy and Rybelsus. Next news is Memristor. Now, the researchers have developed a new kind of brain-inspired nano device which is known as Memristor. Now, first understand that all of you know that AI consumes a lot of energy. Now, the reason why it consumes a lot of energy is because there are two things that are happening. One is that it has a memory-based device, or it has a memory component, and then it also has a processing component. Now, there's a huge distance between the memory component and the processing component. In contrast, in the human brains, we have these things called the synapses. So in the synapses, the memory and the processing, they are glued together. So there's very little change or from transferring from one place to the other. And that is why the human brain can consume very less energy and still function in a very spectacular way. Now, the researchers have tried to copy the same approach in terms of a new device called as hafnium oxide Memristor. Now, Memristor essentially is combined from two words, memory and resistor. Now, memory in terms of the RAM or the DRAM, the dynamic random access memory, and resistor as the kind of tool that resists current flow. In a way, it regulates the flow of current through its body, right? So it is a combination of both memory and resistor. It is inspired by the synapses and functions similarly, enabling both data storage, that is memory, and processing within the same location. This part is important. A synapse is a junction between the axon of one neuron and the dendrite of the another, through which the two neurons communicate. Just understand synapse as a joint where the two neurons are connected inside the human brain or human body. Then what are the advantages? By fusing or combining the memory and processing, these devices have seen that they could reduce energy consumption of the AI by as high as 70%. It will also eliminate high energy or energy intensive data shuttling between separate memory and processing units in conventional computer architecture. And it operates at extremely low currents than the conventional device. So this is going to be a big breakthrough, and it will also develop, not just impact the AI development, but it will also have a profound impact on the traditional computing process as well. Next is memflation. So we just saw about Memristor. Yes, Memristor. Now there's another news on memflation. Again, this is about memory price inflation, which is the continued price hike on the semiconductor memory chips, that is the DRAMs, that is dynamic random access memory. So this term is important. They can ask you about what is memflation related to. It's not about memes, it is about memory inflation or inflation in the memory price because of certain reasons. Now, what are these reasons? First is there's a huge demand from AI. People are continuously using AI for productivity and for personal development, and there is also a mandatory requirement in several of the workplaces. People are vibe coding through AI. This cloud computing, data center acceleration, etc., which require high performance memory chips. But you know what? There's a limited supply as well. And that supply has also come under extreme pressure because of the geopolitical turmoil that we are currently facing. That is why there is limited supply and there is huge demand, and that has led to the very logical conclusion, that is the inflation, right? So that is why it has been pushing the price forward. Next is export profile of India. So the recent reports have suggested that India export has achieved a record development in terms of $860.09 billion despite disruptions due to West Asian conflict. Now, the status is that our total exports have increased to around $860 billion, and India among the top 20 exporters and top 10 in service exports. Again, a very important development. And the trade dynamics is that we are importing $979 billion, which suggests that there is a trade deficit of $109 billion overall and $333 billion merchandise deficit, trade deficit. But to offset that, we have a service surplus of $214 billion. Then when it comes to the structural feature or the composition of that trade, our non-petroleum export is around 388 billion, which is more than, or there is a jump of 3.62 percentage point, indicating that we are now diversifying. And the major destination is China has become as the number one export destination of, or the number one country with which India is trading, replacing US. Along with that, there's growth in China, Spain, Hong Kong, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, and we have also started to diversify towards ASEAN. And we have started to renegotiate the ASEAN-India trade and goods. It's underway, and it's also going to have a significant impact on the exports as well, and also towards Africa, especially in terms of digital trade. And the major products are petroleum products, engineering goods, minerals, agricultural products, especially the cereals, basmati rice, handicrafts, strong services exports such as IT and business services. So this is all about the news today for 16th April. Thank you so much, and make sure that you also attempt the question that is popping on your screen.